Yeah. So let's quickly move on to, I'm deliberately still on this slide because we did not really deal with East Africa. And the basic point there was that the missions work in East Africa, if I could come to that slide, began afresh right where the arrow is beginning to point there. So it is in the Mombasa area, and then you also, I need to be careful, I'm not confusing Mombasa with another name, so let me just quickly check. There's the place next to Tanganyika or Tanzania, and then there's also, okay, yeah. So we've got Zanzibar and then Mombasa. So those are the two names I was confusing. Let me just make sure about that. Yeah, Mombasa is further north. So it's Zanzibar that I was speaking about initially. Yeah, it's Zanzibar. So that initial area there, and then also Mombasa further north, where you are seeing those arrows also beginning to go in. So that's where you have your efforts taking place there. Part of the initial work we saw at the bottom there at the at the opening of the Zambezi River into the Indian Ocean. Initially, the Roman Catholics had attempted, it came to nothing. Now it was the Protestants that were coming in. And surprisingly, the first person who is named in that area is Stanley, the gentleman who met David Livingstone from America a year before David Livingstone died. So Livingstone died in 1873. The year before, Henry Stanley arrived from America. He was just a journalist, a typical non-Christian guy who came looking for David Livingstone because the media had fallen in love with this great Christian explorer who was sending out information, geographical information on the center of Africa. So he came, he met him, and there was that meeting, something like David Livingstone, I presume, and Livingstone answered in similar ways to him. He made his way back to America, but it wasn't long before, a year later, he then came into East Africa, and as he was introducing basically trade to this region, he also attracted missionaries to come and labor there. A number of them, as usual, they got killed in the process. Some of them died from, again, fever, largely malaria. Some of them got into conflict with chiefs and so forth. But by and by, again, missions work got established in East Africa. The missionary mission societies, let me see which ones would have sent their people into East Africa. Yeah, so we have the Church Missionary Society sending some missionaries there. The first two that are named are Ludwig Krapf and John Rebman, who initially labored in Ethiopia, by the way, and then when I think it was Kraft, who then went to marry a wife, and when he came back, yes, it was Kraft, when he came back, wasn't allowed back into Ethiopia, where he was laboring in the province of Shoa. He then decided to come further down and began working in Zanzibar, and then from Zanzibar moved further into Mombasa. So that's how that area got opened up under the church's missionary society. And then later on, you had the Methodists, the Methodist Church that then joined in the work, and then they went further inland into what is called Buganda. Today we call it Uganda. And so that area also got opened up for the gospel. I will not go into the details of names and so forth, but the London Missionary Society also came in to labor there. And that's how the gospel more or less got further established in that area. Okay, the main task that I want us to get involved in now is what is called the scramble for Africa. The scramble for Africa. This was the inevitable fruit of the explorers. Remember, it wasn't just David Livingstone who came into the heart of Africa that at one time was just a blank space on the world map. Other explorers were also coming in to see what was there. And what motivated them, unlike individuals like David Livingstone, what motivated them was the wealth that was in Africa. Gold, ivory, and so forth was attracting their attention. And so they were coming in order to open up the area. Traders were coming in after them as well. And as I've said, it was primarily because of that their governments began to get interested for a number of reasons. First of all, the traders needed protection because if they were not protected, they would be easily killed by either the local people or by competing traders who also were fully armed, rushing for the same raw materials, or the Arabs who were still very much interested in the slave trade, and even in raw materials as well. So there was need for that to happen. But secondly, it was in order to pave way for trade that they needed to establish centers, headquarters for that to happen. They needed to build roads. They needed to put railway lines, because then it was easier for people to travel in and for raw materials to be taken out of Africa. They needed to put up actual structures, buildings made of genuine concrete and other building materials and so forth. So it just made sense that the various nations should move into Africa and provide a protectorate, an area that they would then be able to get raw materials from. The missionaries also were to benefit from this. This will be a subject that I hope we can look at a little more in the afternoon. The benefits that came to actual missions work. But primarily, these countries were coming in for the raw materials. Now, after this slide, I don't want us to move away from it yet, but after this slide, we are going to see at least two pictures that I've put there of the French, the areas that they took up, and the British, the areas that they took up. They were not the only ones. In fact, first of all, I should mention that therefore, the scramble for Africa then took place. Portugal would have been the very first one that quickly moved in, and you will notice that it came into the Congo on the one side and also the Zambezi on the other. So that's how you have currently Angola, which is a little under the Congo River, because the Belgians came and fought and consequently got the Congo. And then on the opposite end, it was the outlet for the Zambezi River, where you have Mozambique as the country there. So they were the very first ones to come in, but the other countries got appeals from the traders who had come in, and also appeals from the missionaries who were also working there. And part of the appeal from the traders, I think you can well understand the reason why. But from the missionaries, it was primarily that depending on which country took over a region, the primary religion or denomination, maybe let's use that phrase, that was in that country is the one that would be supported. And therefore, the others were discouraged. Sometimes the missionaries were even banished from the place. And therefore, you can understand why the missionaries, as word was getting to them about what was happening elsewhere, as other countries were coming in, that they too would appeal to their countries to say, please come in quickly and establish this area as a colony or a protectorate of your country, so that we are being protected. And hence, different countries across the known world, in Europe primarily, obviously, rushed into Africa in order to secure major regions and therefore secure the raw materials for themselves. It's also important for us to realize that this was the stage when the Industrial Revolution had begun in the West. This is now going a little bit beyond spiritual things, but does anybody know what the Industrial Revolution was all about? Well, I suppose you should, but I want feedback from you. Anybody to just give me anything about the Industrial Revolution? Yes. Okay, so that was one effect. It was initially the discovery of the steam engine, basic, okay, which is at a very basic level, okay? When steam is getting out of a kettle, it comes out with force. If you put a wheel next to it, that wheel begins to go around. Inevitably, that then is energy that you can use for something else. As simple as that. Even prior to, just before that, was the water itself, as it's flowing by a river, it's a force, and therefore they would put a wheel there, and that wheel will be turning around. As a result, it's producing energy, which in turn would be powering things. So a lot of factories were therefore being by riversides, because that's where this movement would be happening. Well, the steam engine also came into existence, and as a result of that, as he said, machinery began to take the place of human beings. Anything else that you remember from the Industrial Revolution? Yes. And when producing something, what happens on the opposite side? So products are coming out there. Yes, you need more raw materials. So really, again, it was simply history taking its course. This is not just about the greed of some leaders. It was that there was real hunger for raw materials so that factories can produce, because they now had the capacity to produce. And depending on who got to the raw materials first, that's the one that had more wealth. So inevitably, every country was trying to get its share of Africa, because there was a lot of raw materials. So it was on the front end of the Industrial Revolution. And that explains the building of roads, that explains the building of railway lines, that explains the developments that began to take place in that part of the world. So roughly from 1878 to 1900, a very short period of time, that's what, 22 years, Africa ended up being divided. And the European nations had to agree, they got together and agreed on how you are able to accept that this land has already been taken. You can't get there. So they made those agreements out there. Britain followed after Portugal. France also quickly was involved. Germany also went in. Belgium also went in, and so on. And so that is how Africa ended up largely being divided by these different countries. I've mentioned the way in which there was hindrance to gospel work. And part of the hindrance was primarily because when areas were taken up by different countries, let's assume Portugal came and took over Congo, what is now Angola and Mozambique. Because it was primarily Catholic, the moment the Protestants were there, the Protestants at the least did not get support from the government that was there. At the most, they would be frustrated because the Roman Catholic mission stations would be bad-mouthing these other mission stations, and consequently the government would make it very difficult to renew permits for these missionaries to come in to serve. But on the other hand, those that were missionaries serving mission societies that came from their own country, they largely got support from them. And that's the way in which the work grew because of that. Yeah, now, the best way to understand the scramble for Africa was that the governments themselves were not trying to establish any form of religion. Whoever got there first, it was their own mission agency that took them there. However, what the governments did, because they were sympathetic to their own primary religion, is that they made for instance, French territory, Protestantism found it difficult to survive. So whatever was there that was already Roman Catholic would then multiply. Yeah, so that's what was happening there. And as a result, you find that, yes, French colonies in the end would be largely Roman Catholic, although Protestants would be like a second best there. And then in due season after independence, which we'll come to a little later, the Pan-African movement and so forth, the balancing began to take place by and large. Okay, but I want us to discuss the scramble for Africa, because again, it's just important that we are not just learning it as history, but we are processing it. Any comments, any questions about that period of history? And then, of course, Ethiopia itself was largely spared. You might want to comment about that as well. Yeah. It was not so much a market, because most of the fruit of, or the products of the factories were being consumed in the Western world itself. But yes, some of it would be brought in exchange. But Africa did not have the wealth to buy. So it was more largely what would be, if I'd use the phrase, used in exchange for land that would then be given to the chiefs primarily. But it wasn't, let me use the phrase, it wasn't fair trade, which right now is the big issue. But at that stage, it wasn't fair trade. Like for instance, when in Zambia, because this is now reaching the early 20th century, when copper was discovered in Zambia in 1926, 1927, and basically this is the land, it's already under us, and therefore we begin digging it. So at the most, it is the Africans being given jobs in that section. But otherwise, when now copper was taken to the Western world, and a lot of items that are consumed in copper, like electrical wires and so on, and electrical gadgets that use copper, to now say, let's go and sell them in Africa, there wasn't the infrastructure to consume those things. But the Western world, yes, could consume copper in that sense. Yes? Yeah, I think it's quite simple to answer. Let's suppose you want to produce computers. Okay, yes, you're going to produce computers using copper, but it will not only be copper. You're now going to have to bring many other raw materials from somewhere else to bring into Africa. Now, the businessman is sitting in England, is thinking, what am I doing? Okay, so I'd rather bring everything to England and then turn it into computers and then sell computers elsewhere. Yeah, so that's the reason why developing industries in Africa was not the priority for them. Really, after independence, which brings us to the middle of the 20th century, that's where African leaders should have said, okay, guys, now let's add value to these raw materials so that we can now sell those raw materials. So that's when it ought to have happened. But even then, the Western world was so far ahead that it was going to be difficult to then sell those raw materials out into the rest of the world. I think that's way handy, yes. Yeah, yeah. The answer, before you come to your second question, the answer is yes, but again, I refer to it as a narrative, you know, where it almost makes it look like even for them, it was greed that was making them say, hey, Britain, come over here and colonize this area. When really it was primarily to do with, as I said, there were 2 or 3 reasons. One is that missions work was proving impossible because of the slave trade. So one way to bring about stability was to ensure that the external government there came with its soldiers and put up systems. So it became difficult. For instance, I just can't come into Ethiopia today, even if there's some gold somewhere. I just can't come there and start digging. Because you've got your army, you've got your police, you've got immigration, you've got so many systems that make it impossible. I have to go through proper systems. That's what even makes terrorists have quite a bit of a headache. It's because they can't just come into a country and cause terror. Because there's intelligence, there is the army, there's immigration, there's so many things that make it difficult. So it was in that sense, number one, that the missionaries were saying, come here. Number two, it was for their own protection. So it was to make missions work possible because they needed stability, but their own protection. Because a number of the missionaries were actually being slaughtered by chiefs, by attacks from the Arabs and so forth, that they needed that protection. Then there was also the realization that if the people here are going to develop, we're going to need medical facilities, and we're also going to need educational facilities. And whereas the missionaries tended to provide a lot of that, by national governments coming in, they were also going to provide it for their own people. And as a result, it would make development go faster. So there's truth to it, except the motives that they are giving to the missionaries is what is wrong. The motives were largely genuine and out of love for the people that they were reaching out to. The missionaries, they did not make themselves rich. In fact, they were sacrificing in coming into this part of the world. You had a second question.
My second question is, can the slave trade in other means?
Yeah. I'm not aware of, mass transportation of Africans when the colonialists came into Africa. That's news to me. I'm aware of their what can I call it? They are intelligent young people being taken for education purposes, and even then it was with a view to bringing them back, so that they then participated in the government structures. And a lot of the leaders of the African countries after independence were those that had gone abroad for education and then came back. So that mass exodus bit, I'm hearing it for the first time. I'd love to be educated if it is there. I've done my own share of reading, but sometimes you can be reading a narrative that has been twisted. So if you have any of that information, I'd be interested to know about it. But I need to put it in place that the scramble for Africa was a scramble for raw materials, not primarily a scramble for slaves. That's definitely not what it was. Okay, anybody else? Let's, I need us to process this, because there was the impact, which I'm really hanging on to, that will come to after lunch. There was the impact that took place primarily on missions, and then also missions that then had its impact on the people. And it will be the first thing I want us to handle when we come into the afternoon. So, let me, oh, is that a question coming up? Yes. Yeah, in my reading, there is a bit of that in East Africa, rather than South or West, or South or West. There's, let me try and see if I can find it quickly when we get to East Africa. There was Lutheran activity there before the scramble for Africa. But I saw, oh no, it was the Methodists that I saw in East Africa. Let me quickly just use the Lutheran Church. So we've got, okay, yeah, it's in West Africa here. In 1860, the United Lutheran Church of America, started a work among one of the tribes in Liberia. And in 1874, the Lutherans established the Muhlenberg Industrial Mission, at which Africans were given technical education. Okay, so that's the Lutherans in West Africa. Then 211, again, we have the Lutheran Church. In 1918, the Lutheran Brethren arrived in Cameroon, so that's again West Africa, to help the Paris mission in development, in the development of the work. So there again you have the Lutheran, and then 227. That's the one I was thinking about. This one is in East Africa. And this is what they say. The German missionaries came out. In 1922, some American Lutherans came to work in the Kilimanjaro area. And in 1925, the German societies began to return to their former areas. And then still in East Africa. Let me see. In the period 1918 to 1938, let me just say something about these dates. Normally in church history, and especially in Africa, we tend to use dates related to in the 20th century, dates related to the First and Second World War. So when you hear 1918, it's the end of the First World War, and then 1938 is the beginning of the Second World War. So we would talk about what took place before 1914 or 1915, and then 1918 to 1938, and then 1945 onwards. Because these wars disturbed missions work in Africa as well. We'll come and talk about that in a moment. So in the period 1918 to 1938, that's the reason why they've chosen those dates, several new mission societies came to East Africa. As we have just seen, the American Lutherans started work in Tanganyika in 1922. So that's already been said. And then mission societies continued to make their contributions in the area of medical work. In Tanganyika, in many regions, the mission hospital was the only hospital. The CMS, the UMCA, the Lutherans, the AIM, and the Roman Catholics all operated hospitals there. And then lastly, 239. So again, you can see the period 1945 to 1960. So they've skipped that little period again because it was a new area. So in the area of radio broadcasts, the Lutheran Church built a radio station in Addis Ababa. There you are. We've arrived. Called Radio Voice of the Gospel. Okay. Yeah, so that's the Lutheran work there. There were times, for instance, the Portuguese were the first to get into Congo. Then Belgium came in after that. The Germans were the first to get into East Africa. And I think it was the Britons who came in after that. And so it involved actual war. And it was war that was primarily between European countries in Africa, but they enlisted Africans as soldiers. So for instance, my name, Conrad, was because my great-grandfather was taken from this part of the world, well, not this part, from Zambia by the Britons to go and fight the Germans in Tanzania. So they picked up the name Conrad there and then came and passed it on to a grandson. So there were battles that were largely European battles happening on African soil. And some of those battles were not necessarily simply, this is your land, we are taking over. It was the Germans, this is like the First World War. The Germans, you are bad. You've caused problems everywhere. So even here, we are kicking you out. And so it was the First World War happening on African soil. And when they lost, they were losing soldiers and they were losing everywhere. And in the process, losing the war itself. So yes, there was some amount of bloodshed. Some of it also was in terms of the Africans wanting to defend their land. And a typical example is the Zulus, who lost badly to the Dutch when the Dutch began to make their way up north. It was a bloody battle that was the foreigners against the local people. And the indigenous people had no capacity to win because the firearms were largely in the hands of the colonialists that were coming. Yeah, so there was quite a bit of bloodshed there as well. Okay, my question is meant to be a value question, and I just want to hear you. Was the scramble for Africa good or bad? If so, whatever side you take, why? Okay? Anybody else? I'm wanting to hear you. You've given one example, you know, and this is the thing I speak about narratives. It's like when speaking about abortion and you're trying to stop abortion and someone says, you know, all these young ladies that are being raped by bandits and so on, now you want them to be, you know, bring up these children. And you're thinking, okay, that's true, they are being raped by bandits, but it's not the whole truth. So there is what was bad. Let's accept that was bad. Let's not make that color the rest of the narrative. So I'm deliberately pushing you to think. Anybody else? Yes?
I think which is arguable.
Okay. Let's also think about that before we come to you. Let's think about that. And I'm glad you've sort of thrown in some positive, because that's what I want now to bring in. If the scramble for Africa didn't happen, if colonization did not happen, what damage would have happened to Africa? I'm pushing you to think. If colonization had not happened, what damage would have happened to Africa? Yeah. Okay. So now normally when you hear narratives about colonization, there is a sanitizing of Africa. It's like, you know, people just living peacefully, inter-tribes just relating nicely, okay, undeveloped but nice. And then people came in with guns and then, hey, you know, they divided the land. The truth of the matter was that life, because of human greed, I think we've all agreed about the fallen nature, was going from bad to worse. And it was the missionaries with the gospel who witnessed this and sent an appeal. Yes, the traders did as well. So it's a mixture. But the thing is that especially the small tribes, the tribes in the inner section of Africa, they were the ones who were the chief victims of this. Zambia alone has, and it's a small population right now, we're about 15 million people. We have over 70 tribes, 70. Why? Well, the basic answer is that the small tribes ran away from the coastal regions because they were being ambushed and sold as slaves. So they all ran into this area where you have the equatorial forest to try and hide from what had now become common fare. The only time they could now breathe was when the area became a protectorate. And therefore now they could come out of hiding and begin to live a normal life. And again, we need to throw that into the mix. It was not all good that was happening when the colonists came in, the slaughtering of those tens of thousands of individuals. But let's remember that it was in a real fallen world that all this was beginning to happen. And therefore, it was a mixture of good coming out of human greed, honey coming out of the lion's mouth. And I want to repeat, those of us who are Christians must be very careful that, again, we have the right narrative and it always becomes a mixture. Yeah. So there was human greed, there's no doubt about it. Otherwise, why would governments come? There was the Industrial Revolution, they wanted raw materials, and consequently, they came in to get those raw materials. And where there was resistance, there was slaughter, which is terrible. But they wanted the raw materials, and consequently, they came in as well. The only thing is, again, us realizing that greed was everywhere. It was the people that were coming in that were greedy. There was sin, and life was going from bad to impossible, even when we're among ourselves. So even when we speak about, what word did I want to use? There were great civilizations here. Those civilizations were also attacking the smaller ones. Okay, I mean, Shaka Zulu, for instance, was such a vicious guy that the Zulus themselves took on that culture, that we had a lot of the smaller tribes crossing not just the Limpopo River, but even crossing the Zambezi River. 2 rivers just to go and hide somewhere from what was happening. And they were not running away from colonialists. They were running away from African tribes. And today, in Zambia, we have ceremonies that mark the smaller tribes running away from the bigger tribes. They actually have ceremonies for that. And crossing an entire river to run for your life is not the easiest of things. Those were crocodile-infested rivers. So we lost brothers and sisters as we were running away from one another. Life stabilized for a season when we went into the period of colonies. And then later on, our own leaders thankfully realized, hey, guys, why are we being ruled by other people? We can rule ourselves. And then came the fight for independence, which we'll come to in a moment. Okay, so there were those realities. On the whole, I think if we were to have an ideal world, yes, we should have been left to rule ourselves. And we would have developed at our own pace, and so forth. But God is sovereign. He brought these things into being for a purpose. And thankfully, there were positives as well for the work of missions.